Lay down the law. All right, here goes. I've been sitting on this for months, maybe years, and I just need to get it out. Because if I don't, it'll eat me alive. So let's start at the beginning. My name's Adam, I was 27, fresh off a failed engagement and just started at this big downtown law firm. I'm tall, which people notice first, but then they always say I have a baby face, soft features, kind of boyish, even though I'd been told I was good looking. Problem was, I was shy as hell with girls. I was clam up, turn red, stumble over words shy. Didn't matter how many times they smiled at me or touched my arm, I just couldn't get my act together. Dates? Disaster zone. Pathetic, I know. Then came Miss Preston, the partner. First day at the firm, I'm in the conference room, sweating through my starched collar, when she walks in. Blonde hair like fire, a tailored suit that showed every curve, and a presence that just filled the room. She was 39, the youngest partner in the firm's history, and everyone called her Preston, no first name, no niceties. She had this way of speaking, sharp, confident, like she knew she was the smartest person in the room before she even opened her mouth. And her laugh. Husky, like it came from somewhere deep, and it made my chest tighten every time I heard it. Oh, and she drank scotch on the rocks, always, even at lunch. Said it helped her think clearer. The first time she noticed me was a week later. I was in the library, buried in case files, when she leaned over my shoulder, so close I could smell her perfume, something spicy and warm, and said, "You're new, right? They told me you're a whiz with contracts. Let's see if you can keep up." Just like that, she took me under her wing. Started bringing me to client meetings, letting me draft memos, but it wasn't just work. She'd tease me and call me baby face in that low voice, brush against my arm when she passed, linger a little too long when she corrected my posture. "Shy boys are my weakness," she'd say, smirking, like it was a secret just for us. And God, did I love it. Every time she singled me out, my heart raced. I wanted her to notice me, to keep picking me, but I was too scared to do anything about it. I'd just nod, blush, stammer out a "thank you," and pray she didn't notice how hard I was trying not to stare at her lips. Our first encounter was in her office, late one night. We'd been working on a case for weeks, and she'd poured us both scotch, me, barely able to sip it without coughing, her, swirling it like it was water. She was wearing a silk blouse, cream-colored, and the top button was undone just enough to see the curve of her collarbone. I remember thinking how unfair it was that someone could look that powerful and that inviting, all at once. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and said, "You know, you're too tense. You need to relax." Then she reached across the desk, took my hand, and placed it on her knee. Just like that. My brain short-circuited. Her stocking was smooth, her leg warm under my palm, and I froze. "See," she said, her voice softer now. "Nothing to be scared of." But I was scared of how much I liked it, scared of what would happen if I moved my hand higher. I didn't. I just sat there, rigid, until she laughed and pulled away, saying we should call it a night. I left that night with her touch burning on my skin, hating myself for being such a coward. The second time was at a client's office. We were negotiating a merger, and the client had this fancy suite with a view of the river. Preston had been drinking again, more than usual, and she kept shooting me these looks across the conference table, like she knew exactly what I was thinking about that night in her office. After the meeting, the client excused himself to take a call, and Preston walked over to the window, motioning me to join her. "Look at that view," she said, but she wasn't looking at the river. She turned to me, her face inches from mine, and I could taste the scotch on her breath. "Baby face, you've been avoiding me," she said, not a question. Before I could deny it, she took my hand and pressed it to her waist, just above the hem of her skirt. Her skin was hot through the fabric, and I could feel the softness of her curves under my fingers. I tried to pull back, I swear I did, but she held my hand there, her thumb brushing against my knuckles. "Don't you want to know what it feels like?" she whispered. And God help me, I did. I wanted to know what it felt like to touch all of her, to have her show me exactly what she wanted. But then the client came back, and she stepped away like nothing had happened, leaving me breathless and shaking. The third time was in the park, of all places. It was a Saturday, and I'd gone for a walk to clear my head, when I saw her sitting on a bench, feeding the pigeons. She was wearing a trench coat, open, and underneath, a dress that clung to her like it was painted on. "Sit with me," she said, patting the spot next to her. I did, awkwardly, my knees knocking together. She talked about work, about the case, but her hand kept drifting closer on the bench, until her thigh was pressed against mine. "You know, I didn't become partner by playing it safe," she said, turning to me. "Life's too short for that. Don't you want more than just blending in?" Then her hand was on my knee, squeezing, moving up, until I could feel the edge of her fingers under the hem of my suit pants. I looked around, panicked. There were people around, homeless guys on the other side of the path, a couple walking their dog. But she didn't care. Her eyes were locked on mine, daring me to stop her, to say something. I didn't. I just sat there, rigid, as her hand moved higher, as I felt her thumb brush against my God, I can't even say it. But I wanted it. I wanted her to keep going, to take control, to show me that I wasn't just some shy kid anymore. But then the dog started barking, and the couple turned our way, and she pulled back, smiling like she'd just told a joke. "See," she said. "Excitement is everywhere, if you're brave enough to take it." By then, I was a mess. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep at night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile, her hands, the way she looked at me like I was hers for the taking. And I was. I just didn't know how to admit it. Until the fourth time, the night it all came to a head. It was late, again. The office was empty, most people gone home, except for the night janitor somewhere down the hall. Preston had asked me to stay late to go over some files, but when I walked into her office, the lights were low, and she was sitting on the edge of her desk, not in her chair. She'd taken off her jacket, and her blouse was unbuttoned at the top, revealing a lace black bra. "Close the door," she commanded, and her voice was different, husky, like she'd been waiting for this. I did, my hand trembling. She stood up and walked over to me, so close I could feel the heat of her body. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" she said, reaching up to touch my cheek. "Thinking about what would happen if you stopped being so polite, so shy. What if I told you I want you to be aggressive? To take what you want, just once?" I don't know where it came from, maybe months of pent-up frustration, maybe the way she was looking at me like she needed me as much as I needed her, but something snapped. I grabbed her waist, pulled her against me, and kissed her hard. She moaned into it, her hands in my hair, her body arching into mine. It was everything I'd imagined and more, her lips soft, her tongue tasting of scotch and something sweet, her curves pressing into me like they'd been made to fit. I forgot where we were, forgot the risk, forgot everything except the feel of her against me. Then her hand slid down my chest, undoing my tie, fumbling with the buttons of my shirt. Finally she breathed, and it wasn't a whisper, it was a growl, like she'd been waiting for this as long as I had. My hands moved on their own, sliding up her back, undoing the clasp of her bra, feeling the warm silk of her skin under my fingertips. She gasped when I touched her, and that gasp went straight through me, lighting every nerve on fire. I wasn't thinking anymore, I was just acting, letting every pent-up desire take over. But then, click. The sound of a door opening down the hall. The janitor, probably. We froze, Preston's eyes wide, her chest heaving. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, the air thick with what we'd almost done. Then she laughed, low and shaky, and stepped back, smoothing her hair, redoing her blouse like nothing had happened. "Better go before he sees us," she said, but her voice was still rough, still charged. I nodded, speechless, grabbing my jacket and fleeing the office like a criminal, my heart pounding in my ears. That night, I lay in bed, replaying every second of it. The way she'd pressed into me, the sound of her breath, the feel of her skin, God, I'd never felt so alive. But I also felt guilty, scared. She was my boss. Older, more experienced, in a position of power. What if she regretted it? What if she fired me? But the next late evening, when I walked into the office, she just gave me that smirk, the one that said, "I know exactly what you're thinking," and motioned me into her office. "Close the door," she said, and my stomach flipped. Inside, she didn't sit behind her desk. She stood by the window, looking out at the city, her back to me. "Last night," she said, "that was unexpected." My heart sank, until she turned, and I saw the fire in her eyes. "But I liked it. I liked seeing you stop being so careful." She walked over to me, slowly, like a cat approaching prey. "Do you want to know what I've been thinking about since then?" she asked, her voice low. "I've been thinking about how you tasted. How you felt. How much I want you to do it again." I didn't need to be told twice. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled her to me, kissing her with all the hunger I'd been holding for weeks. Her hands were everywhere, my shoulders, my back, undoing the belt of my trousers, while mine slid under her skirt, feeling the softness of her thighs, the lace of her stockings. She pushed me onto the couch, straddling me, her hair falling around us like a curtain, blocking out the rest of the world. I could hear the distant hum of the office, people talking, phones ringing, but it felt miles away. All that existed was her, the heat of her body, the way she gasped my name into my mouth. I started to get rock hard, her hands undoing my fly, while I hiked up her dress, feeling the smoothness of her thighs, the stockings. She was wearing lacy underwear. I pressed my hardness against her, her legs wrapping around my waist, and for a while, everything else faded away, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way she moved against me, the way she whispered yes, yes, don't stop into my neck, the way we both knew how risky this was, how wrong, but couldn't bring ourselves to care. After a wet kiss she told me to stand up. So I did, my pants fell to my ankles. She knelt in front of me and looked up into my eyes. She took my hardness and consumed it like she was starving. She moved her head up and down, with a rhythm that was mesmerizing. The sensation was out of this world. In all the fumbling with girls in the past, I had never had someone take me in their mouth before. It was like flying, my head getting dizzy. I started to build the pressure, it kept rising and rising until I couldn't handle it anymore and I exploded into her mouth. Wave after wave, and she kept the movement going, now talking her head. Not a single drop was spilt, I saw her consume everything that was coming out of me. She used her tongue to flick the underside of my hardness and I felt a second more intense and quick climax coming. I exploded a second time and she took it all again, not spilling a drop. My chest was heaving and I felt like falling over. I looked down and she was still maintaining eye contact with a devil grin on her face. She finally took her mouth off and she said, "Absolutely delicious, I want more." But I had no more. I collapsed onto her leather couch a few feet away. She walked over and lay on top of me and caressed my hair. "Baby face, my doll, my man," she said. It was the most intense few minutes of my life. As the weeks went on, my confidence grew. I wasn't the shy, stammering junior anymore. With Preston, I felt bold, desired, seen. She pushed me, challenged me, made me want to be better, not just in with her but at work. I started speaking up in meetings, arguing cases with confidence, and to my surprise, the partners noticed. Preston noticed. "You're changing," she'd say, smirking, as we lay tangled in her office couch after hours. "Getting bolder. I love it." But with the confidence came a new fear, the fear of getting caught, of losing this thing we had, whatever it was. Because it wasn't just about the fooling around anymore. It was about the way she understood me, the way she made me feel like I mattered, like I was more than just a baby-faced junior. Then came the business trip to Chicago. We were there to negotiate a merger, sharing a suite at a fancy hotel, separate rooms, of course, but that didn't matter. The first night, after dinner, she knocked on my door, wearing a silk robe, her hair down around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep," she said. I had just finished a shower and my hair was still wet. "Thought we could go over the case files." But there were no files. She pushed her way in. She presented a red silk scarf and told me to tie her hands behind her back and I did. She said, tonight was my opportunity to do anything I wanted, and I didn't waste the opportunity. I took her tied-up body and threw her over the office desk. She was face down and I raised up her robe and started caressing her bare buttocks, tickling, teasing as she twitched. I pulled down her red lace panties and started to explore her slit which was soaking wet. She moaned and kept calling out my name. I told her to shut up sternly, and she squealed. I told her to present her behind to me and beg not to harm her. She begged. I told her to tell me that she would do anything not be harmed, and she again said the words. I told her to call me sir and she begged and begged. Pleading with me. "Please, please, sir, please don't hurt me, I will do anything you want. You can have me any way you want, just don't hurt me." It was these words that made me rock hard and I felt like even my legs were going stiff. I felt muscular and masculine and spanked her hard and she squealed more. I pressed my hardness against her entrance as she was still bent over the desk, hands tied, panties at her ankles. The wetness felt so slick and I toyed with her at her entrance, refusing to enter. She begged some more and then I thrust hard and she let out a shrill scream. I began to feel myself now. I kept talking to her, telling her she is my plaything now and that I need to have complete access to her body whenever I pleased. I told her she was my piece of meat and that I was going to feed her my seed whenever I wanted. She started to squeal even louder. I picked up the pace, slamming myself relentlessly into her, my hands gripping her skinny waist so hard I was leaving red finger marks. Her noises got short and quick and she said she was close, so close, then she screamed in climax, gripping me tighter with convulsions in her body. I spanked her hard and asked her if I gave any permission to have pleasure, and she immediately apologized profusely, begging for forgiveness. I was getting close myself and I grabbed her hips and turned her around and pushed her to her knees. She had tears in her eyes, her mascara running down her cheeks. I told her to open her mouth wide and I rammed into her face with a brute force and started up again, holding the back of her head and shoving it into my waist. I grunted loudly and exploded in her mouth, the convulsions coming over and over. She was doing her duty and didn't let a single thing drop out and consumed everything I gave her. She dutifully cleaned up my rod and had puppy dog eyes and said to me, "Sir, did I please you?" I told her she was a good girl and that she would be rewarded. It was an unforgettable night that I remember vividly to this day. The following days we continued to play power games, each taking turns being the aggressor. It was a magical time. The final encounter, the one that would change everything, happened a month later, on a stormy night when the rain lashed against the office windows like it was trying to break in. Preston had sent me a note earlier that day, scrawled in her sharp, angular handwriting, "Stay late. Wear the suspenders. Don't ask questions." I'd obeyed, of course, my pulse quickening with every hour that passed. When the office emptied, I knocked on her door, and she let me in without a word. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of her desk lamp and the occasional flash of lightning. She was sitting in her leather chair, spinning slowly, a glass of scotch in one hand, a silk scarf in the other. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and she was wearing a men's dress shirt, unbuttoned, revealing the curve of her breast and a black garter belt holding up her stockings. "Lock the door," she said, her voice calm, almost clinical. I did, my throat dry. I approached, and she stood, circling me like a predator assessing prey. "You've been a good boy, haven't you?" she said, trailing the scarf down my chest, the fabric whispering against my shirt. So eager to please. "But I think it's time you learned what happens when good boys give in to their worst desires." When I heard that, I knew what role I was going to play. Before I could answer, she'd looped the scarf around my wrists, pulling them behind my back and tying them tight. The silk bit into my skin, making me gasp. "Be quiet," she said, pressing a finger to my lips. "No more words." She guided me to the desk. I sat on her chair, my hands bound, helpless. The storm outside roared, but in that room, there was only her eyes dark, her breath steady, her hands moving over me with a purpose I'd never seen before. She unbuttoned my shirt slowly, her nails scraping gently over my chest, down to my stomach, making me arch into her touch. When she reached my suspenders, she paused, smirking. "Such a good little lawyer," she murmured, undoing the clips, letting them fall to the floor. "But I don't want good tonight. I want you to let go. To stop thinking about right and wrong." Her mouth was on my neck then, biting, sucking, leaving marks I knew I'd have to hide the next day. But I didn't care. The feel of her hands, the sting of the scarf, the way she was taking control, it was like she was unraveling every layer of the person I thought I was, revealing something raw, primal, hungry. She made me stand up and then slid my trousers down, her fingers brushing against me, and I groaned, unable to hold back. "There he is," she whispered, almost to herself, and she could see my stiffness rise. She then pushed me over her desk, my tight elbows touching the cold wood. She bent me over and took out another scarf and blindfolded me. Then she told me to wait, and a second later, I could hear her slap her hands with something flat and wooden. "You have disappointed me," she said, "something must be done about it." I gulped and knew what was coming. She whacked me swiftly and I let out a grunt. The pain stinging all the way into my brain. "Tell me you're sorry," she commanded. "I'm sorry," I yelped weakly. "No, call me madam when you address me, you scum," she barked. "I'm sorry, madam." Whack. "I'm sorry, madam." Whack. "I'm sorry, sorry, madam," I yelled. She paused to say, "Good boy, now that you know who is boss, remember that I have the power to make you bleed. Now get up." She stood me up and untied my hands only to tie them behind me. She then led me to the sofa and told me to sit down. My buttocks were still burning with the punishment and it stung to sit down. There I sat, with my hands tied behind my back and blindfolded, not knowing what was going to happen next. I heard her unscrew some kind of bottle and it sounded like she squirted some kind of lotion. Then I felt her hand on my soft member. The lotion was cold on my skin and she grabbed my manhood and started to slowly stroke. "Utter boy." she whispered into my ear. It sent shivers down my spine. She stroked it slowly yet had a hard grip. Now you're going to feel frustration, she whispered. I didn't know what she meant, but after a minute of her licking my nipples and stroking me, I was near climax. My breathing heightened and I started, my stomach retracted. Not yet? She said. And she paused the stroking and instead rubbed her thumb on my engorged head. I held my breath. I was just on the edge when she grabbed the base of my member and squeezed hard. I could feel I was an inch from climax, but it reversing and the pressure slowly subsiding. She giggled. She did this over and over, until I was begging her, pleading with her to let me release. After the 5th or so time, she finally said, "You've been a good boy, so now you can let go." She took me to the edge and covered my manhood with her mouth, and I exploded into her with the force of a bomb. My mind was flooded with ecstasy and I convulsed over and over as she consumed all that came out of me. It was the heaven I never wanted, but I was there. She then straddled me and embraced me softly, giving me soft kisses all over my face while she whispered, "Good boy, well done." We were completely owned by each other. I was hers and she was mine. Nothing else made me feel more accepted and complete. The following days were so busy at the office we didn't get a chance to meet up again, and my urgency for her was fuming. I'd just won my first big case, thanks to Preston's guidance, and the partners were talking about promoting me. She called me into her office that night, a bottle of champagne in hand. "To your promotion," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "And to us." Us. She'd never said that before, us. It made my chest tighten, made me realize how much this had become, how much I'd come to need her. We drank the champagne, laughing, talking about the future, about how far I'd come. Then she stood up, came over to me, straddling my lap in the chair. "You know," she said, tracing my jaw with her finger, "I've never met anyone like you. So shy at first, but with so much potential." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I want to see you reach that potential. In every way." And then she was kissing me, slow and deep, her hands undoing my shirt, while I unzipped her dress, letting it fall to the floor. She was wearing that black lace bra again, the one she knew drove me wild, and I couldn't help but stare, marveling at the sight of her, the woman who'd changed everything. This time, there was no rushing, no fear of being caught. We took our time, exploring each other, savoring every touch, every gasp, every moment. It was different from the hurried, passionate encounters before. This was slower, more intimate, like we were both acknowledging something deeper, something we couldn't put into words. She guided my hands, showed me what she liked, and I followed, eager to please, eager to make her feel as alive as she'd made me feel. And when it happened, when we finally, completely gave in to each other, we made slow, longing love there on the floor. I was inside her, filling her up just as she was inside my mind. As we came near climax, she brought my mouth to hers and said, "Inside me," and I released all that tension inside her. We continued to passionately kiss all throughout the finish and continued to roll on the floor. The wetness of the finish making both of our bellies slick and sticky, but we didn't care. It was a revelation. A moment where all the fear, all the doubt, all the secrecy fell away, and there was just us, connected in a way I'd never thought possible. Afterward, we lay there, wrapped in each other, the city lights glowing outside the window. "They're going to promote you next week," she said, tracing circles on my chest. "You deserve it." I smiled, feeling proud, but also anxious. What would happen now? Would this end? Would we have to pretend it never happened? But she seemed to sense my thoughts. "We'll keep it a secret," she said. "For now." "But don't you see? You're not the same person who walked into this firm 6 months ago. You're confident, capable, powerful. And I like who you've become." She kissed me again, soft and lingering, and for a moment, I let myself believe it could last. That we could have this secret and thrilling affair, while my career soared. But I also knew the risk, the gossip, the scandal, the way it could all come crashing down if anyone found out. But in that moment, lying there with her, I didn't care. I felt alive, desired, seen. And isn't that what we all want, deep down? To be seen by someone who makes us feel like we can be more than we ever thought possible.